Shadow and Bone Season 1, it is finally here. Like always, I'm going to break this review down into categories. This won't have any major spoilers, it will allude to things, but nothing that will ruin an ending or episode for you. This time, because it's based on a book series, well, multiple book series technically, the categories will be production, adaptation, and execution, meaning how well did they execute their plan through production and adaptation. Let's start with production though, because that's what influences the other categories the most. The production, in a word, excellent. IMDb says it's TV mature, but I think that's a mistake on their part because Netflix has it listed as TV 14, which is definitely more accurate. There's no nudity and only mild language. The worst part by far is the violence, which isn't even that bad. It's violent, but it's a far cry from a Tarantino movie. Now, it had its small blunders, but for the most part, they did such a great job making this world feel real. And the shadow fold, Ketterdam, and costumes did most of the heavy lifting there. The fold was unbelievable. Way better than what I had in my head when I was reading the books, and their sound design with it sold it even more. Very ominous sounds coming out of that, like I would not want to go in there in real life. The darkness was great overall, actually, from a production standpoint. Even the attacks by the Darkling were wild. That one move that we saw early on in the books, it's called the cut. And when you're reading it, you're like, ooh, the cut, so scary. No, very scary. The first time we see it, it is so aggressive, and it only gets more so from there. Ketterdam felt like that really grungy, dark but lively place it needed to be to make the Crows and their plot work. Like London in the 20s or something, bunch of gangs and schemers. I absolutely loved it. And in terms of costume design, every single person in this show was in well-crafted attire. The keftas, Kaz's hat, the Russian feel to the design and the world building, which again, kind of dipping into the adaptation portion of the review, but it was all excellent. And with costume design, you can throw in prop design because they also sold this world. The coins, the guns, Kaz's cane, the amplifiers, it was all the little details of this show that they pulled out of the books that made it work. They very clearly didn't phone it in when they were piecing this production together, which, speaking of, I couldn't find any credible sources that talked about the cost per episode to produce this show, but whatever their budget was, I think they did a fantastic job. To balance all of the things we just spoke of on top of cast and crew member salaries, location scouting, and post-production, it is no small feat. So I'll go 9 out of 10 for production. It loses a point solely because nothing is perfect, you can always make it better, but great overall. Okay, adaptation. How close is it to the books? Well, 85%. The 15% that's not accurate is mostly because they merged 2 sets of books. If you don't know, Shadow and Bone trilogy is 3 books that all revolve around Alina's story, basically, and then there's a duology that focuses on the Crows. In the books, the majority of these characters never meet each other. However, in the show, their storylines interweave. That was a creative decision they made to give a new perspective on the story, and I get that. They have every right to do it, especially with Leigh Bargudo, the original writer, being an executive producer. But for the people that are calling it canon, I don't know if that's an accurate term simply because we know what happened in Shadow and Bone, and we have a general idea of what happened with the Crows during that time. They most certainly were not with Alina. So again, that's fine, it played out well on screen, but not accurate to the books. Other than that, he's not called General Kerrigan, his name is the Darkling. They changed that because he sounded too much like a villain. And then there's the amplifier. Spoilers on this one, earmuffs, but I thought it was a piece of jewelry where she wears the stag horns. But here, the writers were like, no, we're just going to shove these antlers inside of you. And then later on, they fuse with her and disappear. Also don't remember that happening in the books. In fact, they should have justified it in some way because in the books, it is a pretty big thing that you can break and lose an amplifier. If it's fused with you, that couldn't happen. So what was accurate was 1, the world itself, which we just discussed, and 2, the characters. Man, they did such a good job with these castings. Now, I do have a few complaints. I don't think Zoya is wildly accurate to her description, and I think the really random scene where David's messing with his hair and clothing doesn't portray him well. He's supposed to be an intellectual first who doesn't know how to socialize well, and I don't know. Caring about your appearance isn't generally a trait someone with those descriptors have. I could be wrong, that was just my impression. Everyone else, no complaints. Mala was great, Alina very believable, but I think without question, the Crows stole the show. Inej was perfect, Kaz was perfectly glum, and Jesper was, well, entertaining is an understatement. He carried the comedy in this, which it's not a comical thing, but he brought it. Between the comfort goat and the shots being stolen from him in the bar, like he just brought this lightness to the story that in a really dark story felt needed. I could not be happier with the Crow's portrayal as a whole. I also real quick want to shout out these two. They also added some lightness to this in terms of comedy. Lastly, a fantastic job was done of character building in ways that the audience might not have even noticed. All the talk of Alina being sick and her appetite was a huge part of the first book. The Apparat with his creepiness was, Inej with the tattoo, the importance of Mal and Alina's childhood, the sometimes tense relationship between Kaz and Jesper. The writers dipped their toes into these little things that actually matter a lot in the big picture, and I'm glad we got to see that. So adaptation, I'm going to give an 8.5 out of 10 because I'm taking the integration of stories as a creative choice. I'm not taking away points for that. The missing points here are from the other things that I listed. In the end, everyone ended up where they needed to, and nothing veered so far off of the original material that the story is now broken. It's not. It's very much intact and ready to be picked up again in season 2. Lastly, we have the execution or delivery of it. What was the final product? How did the culmination of all of this turn out? And I'd say pretty damn well for what they went after. We've discussed production, writing, performance, and all of that, but at the end of the day, characters are what make a story. There was an interview given where Ben Barnes, who plays General Kerrigan, aka the Darkling, said, all the fans want is to see these characters brought to life by people who care about them. And he says, I promise them, the fans, they could not have a more passionate group of people telling this story. And it's so obvious that that is the case. When you watch interviews of this cast, they have a great chemistry and they know everything they need to. They've all read the books and studied their descriptions and everything from fighting style to attitude. They know their character backgrounds and genuinely care about how the fans were going to perceive their performances, and I really think that's what makes this work. The main complaint I will say about the execution is I wish they wouldn't have merged stories because they were both so good on their own. I could have used more time with the Crows and planning heists, and I could have used more time in the Little Palace getting to know the political structure and inner workings of the Grisha. So I guess my complaint isn't that they merged the stories, that's fine. But if they were going to do it, I wish that it would have been longer. More than 8 episodes, definitely, because parts of this felt rushed for time. We got the same result in the end, but more time to linger with the emotions and build character relationships with each other would have done a lot for this show. Also because they had 2 very different vibes to them, the character storylines I mean. One was super funny and witty, and the other felt like a romance with a heavy, the world is on the line type of vibe. Neither is bad, but with the rushed timeline, it sometimes felt jolting to go from one to the other. I'm interested to see what they do going forward with these interweave storylines, knowing what we know about their futures, especially if you've read the books. So overall on delivery, I'll go 7.5 out of 10. The rush story took a fair amount away from me, but if you added all my scores up and divided, that leaves us with an 8.3 out of 10, which seems fair. IMDb users gave this an 8.2, Rotten Tomatoes users gave it a 94%, which is definitely too high. No individual episode is even rated that high, but season 2 cannot come soon enough for me. If you haven't read the books, I highly suggest them. You'll have plenty of time before the next season. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.